Today I'm going to compare the prices of the iPhone 10 with the iPhone 8 Plus, iPhone 8, as well as Samsung's new Galaxy phones and Google's new Pixel phones. Hey guys, I'm back today with another video about my iPhone 10. Now in my last video, I gave you my overall impressions of the iPhone 10 and talked about one of the features, Face ID. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, it's up on the channel. Take a look if you're interested. Now in that video, I said I wanted to do a price comparison between the iPhone 10, 8 Plus, and 8, as well as some top-of-the-line Android phones, just to get a perspective on this very high price of the iPhone 10. Let's get started. Now, in 2017, Apple came out with the iPhone 10, iPhone 8 Plus, iPhone 8. Now, each of these phones comes in two different storage configurations, 64 gig and 256 gig. The 64 gig iPhone 10 is $1,000. The 256 gigabyte iPhone 10 is $1,150. For the iPhone 8 Plus, 64 gig is going to cost you $800. 256 gig is going to cost you $950. And then for the iPhone 10, 64 gig is going to cost you $700, and 256 gig is going to cost you $850. Now, what I did here is a comparison of how much more expensive the iPhone 10 is versus the iPhone 8 Plus and the iPhone 8. It makes sense to compare phones with the same amount of storage. So for the 64 gig iPhone 8 Plus, if you were to buy the iPhone 10 with 64 gig of storage instead, it's going to cost you $200 more or 25% more. So it's a 25% premium over the iPhone 8 Plus with 64 gig of storage. All right, now if you were considering getting the 256 gig iPhone 8 Plus, it would cost you $200 more to move up to the iPhone 10. That's a 21% increase. So the dollar amount is the same. The percentage is a little smaller because the phones are more expensive. So these are the numbers you're really comparing here. It's $200 more to move from the iPhone 8 Plus with the equivalent amount of storage to the iPhone 10. Now, if you wanted to compare apples to oranges, so to speak, well, then you could look at comparing models with different amount of storage. I think the only number that's really interesting here is that if you were to compare the 256 gig iPhone 8 Plus with the 64 gig iPhone 10, you'll see that there's only a $50 difference in the price. It's 5%. So I could see a case where someone was considering getting the 256 gig iPhone 8 Plus, but opted for the 64 gig iPhone 10 instead, just to move to the iPhone 10. The price difference is only $50 there. All right, now moving over to the iPhone 8. If you were going to get the iPhone 8 with 64 gigs but decided to move up to the iPhone 10, the price difference would be $300 or 43%. And if you were looking at the 256 gig iPhone 8 and decided to move to the 256 gigabyte iPhone 10, the price difference would still be $300 or 35%. And then again, you could do that apples to orange comparisons. Price difference is a little higher here. And of note, if you were considering the 256 gig iPhone 8, it's 18% more expensive or $150 more to move to the 64 gig iPhone 10. And I did the same thing comparing the price of the iPhone 10 with Samsung Galaxy phones and Google phones for 2017, so the Pixel series phones. So I'll run through what I put here in the table. So I put the Note 8, the S8 Plus, the S8 Active, and the S8 Plus. That's a typo there. That should just say S8. And then the Google Pixel 2 XL and the Google Pixel 2. Now, for all the Samsung phones, they only come with 64 gigs of storage. I guess the reason for that is they have SD card slots for micro SD cards, so you could bump up the memory on those phones if you want. And then Samsung just opted to put 64 gigs of storage on those phones. So this is going to make it easy for comparing prices with the iPhone 10. All right, now starting with the Samsung's heavy hitter, the Note 8. This is a $950 phone. So the price difference comparing it to the iPhone 10 is the iPhone 10 is $50 more or 5% more. Not that big of a difference there between the two top-of-the-line phones. Now, if you move down to the S8 Plus, it's $825, and you'll see going from the S8 Plus to the iPhone 10 would cost you $175 or 21% more. And then the S8 Active, this is $850, so it would cost you $150 more to move from the S8 Active to the iPhone 10 or 18%. And then this should just say the S8, and that's going to bug the hell out of me. Hold on a second. Comparing it to the Samsung Galaxy S8, 64 gig is $725. So if you were going to go from the S8 to the iPhone 10, it's $200 $75 more, or 38% price increase. All right, now if you think about it, really the big comparison here is between the iPhone 10, the Note 8, and then maybe the S8 Plus. So you can see the price difference here. The iPhone 10 is more expensive, but not a heck of a lot more expensive when you put that in perspective. All right, now moving over to the Google phones for 2017, we have the Pixel 2 XL and the Pixel 2. Now, both of these phones came in 128 gigabyte and 64 gig storage models. So I'm just going to look at the 64 gig storage model and compare those prices. All right, let's start with the big phone, the Pixel 2 XL. 64 gig model is $774. So the iPhone 10 with 64 gigs of storage is $226 more, or 29% more expensive than the Pixel 2 XL. And then for the Pixel, the 64 gig model is $650. So the price difference between the Google Pixel 2 and the 64 gig iPhone 10 is $350. So the iPhone 10 would be 54% more expensive. All right, so what's the takeaway of this? Well, the most valid comparison here is the Note 8 versus the iPhone 10. It's only a $50 difference, 5% more expensive for the iPhone 10. And then if we look over at the Pixel 2 XL for the 64 gig model, we'll see that it's a bit more expensive to move up to the iPhone 10. It's $226 or 29%. All right, now one final thought before I end the video here. If you watch my channel, or if you're like me, you buy your phones full price. You buy them unlocked so you can use them with whatever carrier. You don't have to just settle for the big four carriers that sell these phones. But most people buy their phones and they get them on a payment plan. Now, a few years ago, people used to buy them on contract. You'd buy the service and you'd pay off the phone as part of the contract. Now, pretty much they're payment plans. And most carriers will sell you these really expensive phones and then they'll essentially finance them for you at 0%. You're paying them off over 24 months or 30 months. So the cost of the phone is divided across the number of months that you've decided to pay it off. And that works for the carriers because they can lock you into a plan even without a contract because you're paying off that expensive phone. So if you compare any of these numbers, even the phone with the highest difference in price, take that number and divide it by 12 or 24 or 30, and you'll see it gets much smaller. So I think that's one of the reasons why these phone manufacturers are able to increase the prices on phones, because they know that the consumers are paying that off a little bit each month. And it doesn't look like that big of a price difference when it's divided by 12, 24, or 30. All right, guys, I think that's going to be it for this video. I'll be back with more videos about my iPhone 10 soon. Thanks for watching.